Hey everybody, Red Mage here. Welcome back to this channel and this series where I go through various RPG products that I have and give them a quick flip through and review. In this one, I'm going to be going through the Perilous books by Jason Lutes. These are for Dungeon World, but I would call them system neutral adjacent. I mean, they do have direct references to the Dungeon World game and the mechanics of that game, but the more I look into that game actually itself, the more I realize that a lot of those specific terms for the game, things like moves, are really more tools that GMs can use in any game. Really, because they're so narrative heavy, because they focus so much on the narrative of the game, you can take them and apply them to almost any other game very easily. And a lot of the terms in these books, while there's specific lingo that you need to learn, it's like a couple pages, and it's not really related to the mechanics of the game so much. And the ideas in these books are great. They are great for GMs, for adventure design, region design, dungeon design, specific adventures, but also kind of ways of approaching dungeon design. This book, The Perilous Wilds, the first one I'm going to go through, is more general. It has random tables for things that you might have, NPCs and dungeon features and things like that. So it has a lot of that the random table stuff, random table help that GMs often need. But it's also got a lot of advice on how to approach design and practical steps for how to build a region, build a dungeon, build a town, and all those things, along with some mechanical procedures that are used in the Dungeon World game. But, again, those things are broad enough that you could use them in any game with a little bit of tweaking. And the procedures seem pretty cool and pretty straightforward, so I think with a little bit of tweaking you could make it work in any game. So I'll go through them. As I said, there are 3 Perilous books. There's the Perilous Wilds, there are Perilous Almanacs, which are adventure-ready regions for Dungeon World, but again, you could use them in any game. This one's the shortest of the PDFs that I have. Then there's Perilous Deeps, which are dungeons, full-fledged dungeons, quite a few of them in here. And then finally, after this, I'm going to quickly go through a Book of Beasts, which is 56 monsters for Dungeon World, also by Jason Lutes. But it's a fantastic bestiary for any game. Again, with a little bit of modification, you could use the monsters in here in any game, and they're really cool. They're not generic. So I'll come back to that at the end. But first I want to go through the Perilous Wilds, which is, again, this first book. This one is 80 pages. This is the revised edition. And a note on the revised edition in 2023. So this is just this year. It was revised this year. Here's the table of contents that you're going to be going through. Learn the language, draw the map, lead the way, see the world, weather the storm, live to tell the tale, ask the fates, plumb the depths, trust your gut, and name every person. So it's the different sections of this, glossaries, and then advice on all the different things you're going to be doing. So first is an introduction to the game, and what Dungeon World kind of is, and how this book is to be used with Dungeon World, and then learn the language, which is the glossary terms and tags that you're going to need to know in order to read this book. Things like what a region is, what an almanac is, what an area is, a steading, and a site, and the different kinds of encounters, which are discoveries and dangers. So briefly, a region is there's a map, right? That's your whole map. Then that map is divided into regions, which are large swaths of territory with set boundaries or outlines. And then within that, each region has an almanac, which has bits of information about that region. And then you have within regions areas, which are smaller pieces of geography that stand out as something distinctive. And within those areas, you can have steadings, and sites, and then encounters. And those encounters can be broken into discoveries, which are things to run into, kind of interesting stuff, and then dangers, monsters and traps and things like that. And a discovery is anything that a party finds that's interesting but not an immediate threat. A danger is anything which, if left unchecked, may be harmful. That's the idea there. You get place tags. So this is the idea that tags are a thing that Dungeon World uses to give narrative help to the DM, or the GM. Sometimes they have mechanical benefits or mechanical effects. Very often it's just a way of quickly seeing what this is like and ways of thinking about it. So a climate tag might be frigid or torrid, right? A danger level tag might be unsafe or perilous, just so that you kind of get a sense of what you're talking about at a glance. Here are other tags that you might have, and again, some of them are mechanical, some of them are less mechanical, right? So barren doesn't have any foraging stuff there, or foraging is difficult. But then defensible means that it has natural defenses or it's fortified. So again, just ways of thinking about these really quickly. When you're developing a region, you could use these tags instead of writing out long paragraphs, right? You could just do a quick tag to give yourself a sense of what you're doing, what you're looking at. I think especially if you were designing material for other people to use, this is a great system. Here's an example of abbreviated almanac, right? At a glance, you have just given somebody else your entire region. but with enough blank for them to fill in themselves. But they have enough there to get going. So here's the region of Athon, or Aton. I don't know how to say that. It's the home of the people. It's a human kingdom. It's unsafe, lawful, and civilized. Those are the tags for the kingdom and that region as a whole. And then within that region, there are 3 areas. There's the County Laszlo, there is the Heartwood, and then there's the Felfen. Within the County Laszlo, which is farmland, safe, lawful, civilized, and there is a resource marble there. So you have a breakdown of what it looks like. Then you have a particular steading, which is Whitestone. It's a human town, and again, it has all the tags, including personages and the enmity tag, and you get a whole town right there with 2 particular sites, Whitestone Keep and Temple of Tuzela, who's the goddess of hearth and home. Then you have the Heartwood, which is an area, it's a property of Count Laszlo. Then you have the Felfen, which is a wetlands, perilous, neutral, difficult, and it's contested between Count Laszlo and Chief Yellow Eye, who is the chief of the Vaankus steading, which is a Fenkin village here. And you have a site in that village, which is the Shrine of Vank, and then you have a site outside the village within the area called the Bog Beast Burrow. And that is an abbreviated almanac entry for an entire region. This would be great. And again, if you're trying to give other people your own settings, this would be a great format to follow. You just do this for like 10 different regions and you have an entire world or continent or kingdom developed. That'd be awesome. Great, simple system. Here is a more detailed almanac with more detailed areas and things going on there. What I really like about the format throughout this entire book, and we're going to see through the almanacs and the deeps as well, is that a lot of the bullet pointed points in each region or each area are questions. That's a really cool way to do it. Asks leading questions for you, the GM, to develop on your own. Rather than saying, this is what lives here, it says, what lives here? Right, that's a really cool idea. After describing the place and how it looks and how perilous it is and stuff, what lives here? And then it's up to you to develop it, what would make sense in your world and given what your impression is from this description. I like that a lot. I'm much more on the side of making things yourself as a GM with prompts from the creator rather than the creator saying, here's a whole thing, run this game without much creative input on your own. So I really like these books for that reason. There's a lot of open-ended questions and prompts for you to use rather than set detailed encounters and descriptions and things. So again, you have the Chalkwood Downs, which is a breakdown of the different areas within it, the encounters you might find in those areas, the sites that you could find there, and the treasures that you could find in those places, as well as dangers. In the particular, the Ghost Hollow has the Marrow Sup and the White Walker, which are 2 particular creatures for this region. Now, the mechanics that are given here in the stat blocks are for Dungeon World, but you could use them in whatever game you wanted. You could do it yourself, which is, again, one of the things I think is so useful about this game is that the stat blocks are simple enough and they're OSR adjacent. They're really simple. 16 hit points, armor 2. It wouldn't be that hard to modify that. Armor 0. In Dungeon World, armor is a damage reduction, so you could just switch that over to an armor class system. If it's got armor 2, it's reducing a lot of damage, so it's probably harder to hit, so it has probably higher AC. Armor 0 means it's not reducing any damage, so it's pretty easy to hit, so it's probably like DC 12 or 13 or 10 or something to hit. Right? Something simple like that for Shadow Dark or 5e or something like that. And then once you've gotten past the Learn the Language set, those were examples, remember, in the Learn the Language section, you have Draw the Map, which is how to create a map and what you should be focusing on. And good advice here for how to create a map. If your map is pre-existing, if your map does not exist yet, first put the party on the map. Right? Where are they going to start? That's what's important because they are the center of the game. Where are they going to start? Make sure you know that area. Then you add regions. And now this is sort of a group process for how to create things. So it says, starting with the player with the youngest character, add a region to the map. So this is for if you're doing kind of collaborative world building. You don't necessarily have to do that, obviously. You could do this yourself and just follow the process yourself. But if you wanted to do more collaborative world building, you could. Conventions for naming things. Good advice for how to name things. Basically, name things in your own native language, in this case English, and then translate it into the language that you're using as an influence. And then break it apart into the parts that make the most sense. So he uses English, and the kingdom in his world is based on Hungarian. So he names the place Home of the People in English, and then he translates that into Hungarian, and he gets Oton az Emberek, or Emberek. And he says, that's too long, so we're just going to go with Oton, which is the first part. Okay, great, and that's the name of the town, or the name of the kingdom. So you do stuff like that. It's a good idea. Good advice. Add places, add personal places, add connectors, share rumors and legends with your players, and then set forth. Really great way to quickly build a world in a session 0 or a session -1, where you do a world building session, a character building session, and then the adventure begins after that. You can even do it in the other order, right? Character building session 0, and then session 0.5 or something where you build the world, and then in between session 0.5 and session 1, you, the GM, develop the adventure. Here's a good example for how to draw the map and how to come up with a place, and then a bunch of random tables for regions, D12 tables and terrain, adjective, nouns to develop your own names appropriate to your setting. And again, you can translate these into the language that is used as your influencer. Place names, and then leading the way, which is this section on alternative rules for followers. If your system of choice probably has rules for followers. If not, you could use these. They're fairly easy to put into any game. How you go about looking for help, how you order them around when they do their own thing, call them for assistance, to pay them up, and then to watch them go if they leave. How to create followers, a good simple system to do so. And one of the things that's worth noting here is that the moves, which are the special abilities kind of that every character has, it's how you do things mechanically in the game. You're going to give your skills, abilities, or traits that are flavorful and mechanically useful. They're things that aren't just tags, basically. You give 1 to 3 for your followers. Now, if you're not using Dungeon World, you can still use those moves as the basis for things, basis for special abilities or for other abilities from your system of choice. So for example, if you give them the move that they can notice something hidden, give them a high perception check in 5e or a bonus to perception or advantage on wisdom checks to notice things in Shadowdark or something like that, right? If they can divine the future, give them give them a spell or an ability that once per day they can use this ability to re-roll a die. They can give them something like that. Give them. It's fairly easy to come up with your own things. Once you know what the move is, you can come up with your own mechanical use for it in your system of choice. And I think it's pretty cool. You have instincts and then costs, and I like the way the costs work, what motivates this follower, and mostly it's going to be lucre, renown, or glory, but it could be debauchery, vengeance, affection, knowledge, or good. So less likely to have those other things, but it could be, so you can roll up particular followers. How many hit points do they have, armor and shields, damage, and load and gear, and then the difference between monsters and followers. And here are some of these follower tags that you could have, right there. Archer, organized, healer, stealthy, group, devious, whatever. So that's the section on followers. If your system of choice has a good section on followers, you don't have to use that. But even if it does, I would say take a look at that, and you can use the advice in there and the tables and the process to develop your own followers if you want more detailed followers. Sometimes you just want, henchman number 1, and that's fine. But if you want a more detailed guy with his own motivations and abilities and kind of make it more interesting, then I would say this process is a good process to follow. And again, because it's not really heavily mechanical, it's mostly narrative based, and that's how Dungeon World is as a whole. The mechanics follow the narrative. You can easily add in your own mechanics to fit the narrative created by these rules. That's why I call Dungeon World kind of system neutral adjacent, because it's so easy to apply to any other system. See the world, traveling from place to place, and how those systems should work. Travel time, the journey process, foraging rules, making camp rules, staying sharp, right, scouting ahead. All of again, a procedure for traveling. If your system has a good travel procedure, you don't have to worry about this so much, but it's good advice still, and you might want to consider using it, again, instead of using whatever system of choice, if you're not really interested in the way that your system presents it. Overland travel doesn't have to be boring. Can be interesting, and it can be sort of more of a process and a system. For example, Old School Essentials has an overworld traveling process that's pretty good. You could try both of these and see which one works out better and use the one you like. All right, how to add points of interest in and color, adding color to your adventure and to making the description of the travel interesting there. There's great art in this book too. Beasts in the wild, food and water, getting lost, weathering the storm seasons and meteorological events. This section is addressed to the GM, so players shouldn't really be reading this section. Severe weather moves, and so what the GM can do, and what you can do when there's bad weather. And then these are a bunch of extra classes for Dungeon World. This would be less useful. But you could get a sense of how the Dungeon World classes are laid out, and there's some good advice there in terms of format if you're going to create your own classes. There's some good things to think about. I think it's cool. And you could probably, like for example, Shadowdark is simple enough that you could take these classes and create new classes in Shadowdark based on them. Wouldn't be too hard to do. but they're compendium classes, so it's really something that you're kind of, it sounds like you add in later. You don't really start with this. So you have, yeah, the Delver, the Explorer, the Hunter, the Leader, the Scout. Now this is another way of doing kind of on the fly, you know, random adventure discovery, basically. So as you're going through an adventure, you just roll randomly on things, and it's how to do that. So how to use the D12, the dodecahedra of destiny, and how to interpret those rolls when you roll them at the table to generate things on the fly. Improvised exploration, for example, making monsters, and really great, cool, simple rules for generating quick monsters. Here's generating some treasure on the fly, and what you can find with utility items, art items, and these are where you start to get some really cool random tables. Discoveries, unnatural features, natural features. You get evidence of the creature that you're tracking, the creature itself and the structure. Different settings, so villages, features and problems, towns, features and problems, keeps, features and problems, and cities, features and problems. And then, you know, rules for what the tags are that should be there, and all that, right? So what's going on in these places. Dangers that you might encounter, unnatural entities, hazards, and creatures. And then different creature tables, monsters, if they're extraplanar, beastly, undead, beasts, humanoids. And then various details, if you want them. The age, the color, the adjective, the aspect, the damage type, the alignment, the ability. Really useful whenever you need a prompt quickly, or whenever you want to describe a creature in more detail. More of these tables: number appearing, size, tags, orientations, dispositions, ruinations, magic types, designs, visibility. NPC tables, NPC occupations, whether they're outsiders, criminals, or commoners, tradesperson, merchants, specialists. You roll D12 twice, right? One for a category, one for a specific occupation. This reminds me a lot of Maze Rats, where you get two 2d6 tables. In this, you roll 2d6 twice, right? This is, or rather, you roll 2d6 and you get the proper table. This is sort of like that. NPC traits, NPC followers, and then creating dungeons and rules and advice for how to create dungeons. Terminology that is used, along with the different areas, records, area tallies, rumors, and legends about it, and how you should found your dungeon, the foundation of your dungeon, and the plumbing procedure, so how you actually play the dungeon. You're probably not going to use the plumbing procedure if you're going to use any other game other than Dungeon World, but you certainly could if you wanted to. There are some examples as you go through. Improvised dungeon exploration and how to do that, along with dungeon name generators, dungeon size generators, dungeon theme generators, and then dungeon overview. So you have the form of the dungeon, the situation of the dungeon, accessibility, builder, function, and cause of ruin. Area dressings, area exits, dungeon discoveries, features and traps, and creatures and traps. And then advice for the GM: trust your gut, and just, you know, how to proceed in particularly with Dungeon World. But again, this advice is general enough that you could use it in any game where you can find inspiration. And name every person. And here is a bunch of examples based on different cultures. So you have Hungarian, Yoruba, Finnish, Indonesian. And a thank you to the backers of this, the Perilous Wilds. Okay, so the Perilous Wilds by Jason Lutes is a great GM supplement, regardless of your system. If you're using Dungeon World, I think it would be a must-have. But if you're not using Dungeon World, then you could still get it because it is so close to Dungeon World stuff. It's really valuable in terms of it's really close to any systems stuff, not just Dungeon World. It's system neutral adjacent, and it has great tables, random tables, and the advice that it gives, and even a lot of the mechanics that it gives, could be picked up and put right into any other game. I'm going to go through the other Perilous books, Perilous Almanacs, which is only 22 pages. This is essentially different regions for Dungeon World. You get the Kuratoki Marsh, the Ancient Alvar, the Paths of Ataskazi, Three Faces, Ahamaradis, the Pallid Dunes, and Vanric, the Lake Kingdom. I apologize for all of those names. How to use this almanac, the details, discoveries, and dangers that are within. You can refer to it, you can make something up, or you can roll something up. It's different ways of using it. Here's the Kuratoki Marsh. This is temperate, wetland, difficult, perilous, and neutral. This one is written and illustrated by Donna Almendrala. The details, the discoveries that you can find there. So there's an area, there is a site within that area, then there's another area, then there's another site, 2 sites within that area. There are dangers that you can run into there, monsters that you can run into there, and that's it. So each of these regions is very, very short, very, very simple and straightforward. The Ancient Alvar with details, discoveries, areas, treasures, and creatures. Dangers, hazards, and monsters. The Paths It's in underground tunnels and caverns, unsafe, neutral, barren, and dark. With cool special caves that you can find in here, like the Orman Magara, which is the forest caves. Or the Aesthetic, Pilgrim's Tea. A dungeon, the ruined roost of Kiamet, fortress of the First Age. Kiamet, a primordial being of windstorms and chaos. And the Gokgurul is the Bell of Thunder down here. And different ways of, one of the things that Dungeon World does is you have these more nebulous dungeons. You don't really have to generate them beforehand. You can kind of generate them as you go through. There are common areas and unique areas, and you kind of check them off as you discover them, and you have themes for the different rooms, and you check them off when you use it once, right? So there are 3 primordial power room themes, there are 3 collapsed and buried themes, and there are 3 Adaskazi cultist themes, and you check those off every time you use one. It's an interesting way of proceeding. I don't know if I would do it. You could do it ahead of time. If you wanted to make the dungeon ahead of time, you could use that, the common areas and the roles for that unique areas and the themes as you went. That'd be pretty easy to do. Here's 3 faces, which is a mountain, 3 mountain peaks, the face of judgment, the face of cruelty, and the face of secrets. It's a cool idea with different areas and sites you can find within them. The Pallid Dunes, torrid coastal desert, unsafe, holy, barren, and neutral, with different sites, much shorter. And then Vaneric, the Lake Kingdom. Again, very short, with some dangers and creatures, contaminated water, and things like that. Okay, so here are just the contributors and the book. This is a much shorter book, as I said, it's only 22 pages. But it's a great little regional supplement if you wanted to have some adventure-ready regions that are still open for you to explore at your own pace and you to develop a bit more about. You could easily take these and add them into your game. And they're system neutral, so you don't need to worry about them in too much detail. Or again, system neutral adjacent. I've used that phrase quite a bit, but I think it actually works really well for this. Here is Perilous Deeps. There are 6 dungeons. Uncertain Reflections, Bright Rock Barrow, Those Who Make Vows, the Pit of Danswink, Isha's Gulf, and Raising Hell Under the Holy Mountain. Each of these is by a different author and by different illustrators. And now, what I really like about these dungeons is, first of all, they're all really cool. They're all really flavorful. They're all very unique. They're not just standard, kind of bog standard dungeons. They're all really interesting. But they're each different in their format. I mean, their basic format is the same, but the different emphases is different based on the author and illustrator. And so some of them are clearer, some of them are more difficult to follow. So it's sort of a, some are better, some are not so good. But they're all, I would say at a bare minimum, pretty good at least. And the best ones, I think Uncertain Reflections is one of the best. I love it. I think it's really cool. Essentially, there's this crazy wizard who has raised a fortress out of the glass of the desert, fused it. And then he had a bunch of acolytes who came and bothered him because he wanted a place of refuge. And these acolytes came and said, hey, we want to learn from you. And he's like, all right. And he just turned them into these like glass golems, crystalline golems that mindlessly serve him. So he's basically by himself. It's a great place. So the Iron Marches, which is the location, and then it has some connections to other locations, which are vaguely hinted at. And then you have impressions, discoveries, there's an oasis, and some cool stuff happening at the oasis ahead of the place, and then the Citadel of Glass itself. The themes of it, the common areas of it, and unique areas of it, and how you generate those, and how to roll themes, common areas, unique areas, when you need discoveries, and when you need dangers. And these are the certain common areas you can run into: natural caverns, intact rooms, shattered rooms, studies and balconies, and you can add them in as you see fit, and then you can roll discoveries and dangers for them if you want. So sort of generic rooms, and then there's specific rooms, a kiln where glass and men are fired, a greenhouse abundant with life, a pool from which to scry the present, and a crystal throne where the magus sits. These are the specific, unique areas. And then add exits, ramps, and stairs as you see fit. So this is not a dungeon where you get every room and every hallway and every 5-foot square mapped out for you. Rather, it says, here are the kinds of rooms that are going to be there. Here is the kinds of things you're going to find in there. And you're going to come up with a lot of this yourself. So these are excellent, excellent guides for you to create your own adventures, rather than here is a set adventure with everything figured out for you. I think that's really cool. And here are some of the dangers you can run into: the Etched Epistolary, the Glass Devotee, the Magus, and the Sand Golem. Great powers. Instincts that they have, and then different things that they might do with different attacks and things like that. And you'll notice the stat block here is really simple. So damage D10 plus 2, close, reach, messy, 3 piercing, hit points 16, armor 0, special quality, spellcaster. And then there's a special effect that they can do in the description below. He can entrap them in a prison of glass. He can cast a spell of sand or fire. He can fuse things together with a gesture. He knows when something's been stolen. He can summon a demonic reflection. And he also hesitates when reminded of home. And his instinct is to hoard magical treasures and to suffer no trespassers. A great description of a villain. You have it all right there, and all the rest of his followers around him. And that's it for the whole dungeon. The next is Bright Rock Barrow. This is about sort of an elven civil war and everyone from that civil war and its personal betrayal and, you know, forbidden betrayed love and all these things. And they turn on each other, and there's demons involved, and it's, you know, immortal elves doing immortal elf nonsense, which is great. There's an interesting barrow. Now, this barrow is a little bit less interesting to me simply because it's a barrow, and we've seen that so many times, right? Like a glass fortress in the middle of the desert, that's really cool. A barrow, an elven barrow, is just pretty much simple. We've seen it a lot. And the description of it is, you know, kind of rings of menhirs around an old barrow mound, and okay, you go into it, and it's a little less interesting in that sense, but what's in here is really cool, and the creatures are cool, and the sort of overall story that's in the background is pretty cool. And one of the things I would say is that basically everything in here is you're just going to fight it, it seems to me. Whereas, I don't know, like, the background is all about these betrayals and these, you know, these people turning on each other and this, you know, lost love, and it seems like actually, practically speaking, the things just want to kill each other, and they want to kill you too. So that's that. But there is a really cool magic item in here, at least one, which is the White Crown, and I think that's really awesome. And it's a really narrative-heavy magic item, so if you're going to give it to your players, you're going to have to be careful with what they do with it. And then the different creatures you can fight in here. Those who make vows. This is a really cool adventure and really creepy. There are these beings from another world that can pretend to be almost anything, and they take over bodies. And it's really gross. You can see them there. And there's a cult that follows them, and you have to try to get through it and stuff. And there's also really interesting bits of fiction throughout, little paragraphs that are, it's very, I mean, dour. It goes downhill by the end. The Cult of Promises. The Cult of Danswink, I think is how you say that. Maybe not, I don't know. Vanswink. Oh, it's a V, not a D. That's the problem with this old-timey font. I can never read it. It looks like a D to me, but I guess it's a V. The cool art for this one, I like the pit that goes down to the earth. It's an old mine. There's Magnite, which is the ore that they were doing here. Great art in this one, and I like how this is broken down. It's really, really helpful, really easy to read and read through. There's only 2 themes for this place, which is ruin and infestation. So everything you're going to run into is either ruined or infested. There's unique areas with discoveries that are all listed out for you and dangers that are all listed out for you. This is a really cool dungeon. I like this one a lot. This is my second favorite. I think the glass one is my favorite, followed by this one. These are some people who have started to take over the mine. Or rather, they are a rival adventuring party who are starting to take over it. Or they're there before you, and they're going to not let you come in and do what they ruin their whole plan. Vanswick's Readout, and then another place, a deeper bit, right? So this has themes of arcane research, an ancient curse, corruption, blight, and chaos and destruction. So once you've gone through the mine, you then find the readout itself. Once again, it's sort of more detailed. Unique areas, entry halls, slave quarters, lift terminus, an overseer's workshop, a magnite forge, a hall of cogitation, a library, the audience chamber. Great piece of art for the Cyclops there. A sanctum, the Magi Sphere. And then discoveries, you can find their magic items, for example, the box of Bophoros, or the blue hand. And then the miscellaneous items along with dangers and the creatures you can run into. A blight crawler, Vanswink Arisen. Yesha's Gulf, which is Yesha Gallows Lurker had a singular talent. Of that there was no doubt. She was, bar none, save those long-dead magi who dwell in ancient empires, the greatest fisher of souls this age has known. She built this massive mansion, and or it's sort of a mansion. It's sort of like whatever. There are infinite ways out of this place. It's a fine manor house, but you go in and then you realize it's actually just got these doors to everywhere, and it's this weird place with portals and nodes and bizarre things inside of it, because it's a weird, powerful mage's old mansion. It's not just a house. Much more interesting than just a house. Great ideas there. Death himself is here. And then finally we have Raising Hell Under the Holy Mountain, which is by Claytonian, illustrated by Claytonian. This one is kind of grand in its tone. How you put this into your campaign and what's going on there and why you might enter the dungeon. There's the pyramid, which is where you're trying to kind of get down through. Fonts of purification, chambers of sacrifice, stairs of contemplation, refectory and kitchens, chambers of adulation, dormitories, the freight elevator, then the mystical maze, the holy of holies, and the underworld below. The vault that you're trying to get to, and then the conclusion. So, straightforward underworld adventure with some interesting art there at the end. Then you get the monsters for this particular dungeon, and lots of interesting ones. The holy beast that lurks below, a slither of slimes, a snail man psyker, a tube crawler, a tub licker, the uncreated, and a wailing specter. Treasures, items, and relics that you can find in this adventure. And then finally at the end there's the contributors, those who draw the deeps, and then that last piece of art. Great pre-made adventures for your games. Again, basically system neutral, and so you could use this in any game that you want. You have to be okay being creative, which you should be as a GM, right? You have to be okay being creative here, because you're not given just everything out of these dungeons. Rather, it's up to you to develop them as you see fit and as you like at your table. And there's a lot of wiggle room, but there's a lot of prompting given. So there's plenty of material for your brain to be creative with, and I like that a lot. So Perilous Deeps, Perilous Almanacs, and the Perilous Wilds are all three great books. Excellent books for GMs to use in their creation process. Final thing I want to cover here is a Book of Beasts. This is also by Jason Lutes. This is 56 monsters for Dungeon World, but don't let it trick you. Again, Dungeon World's mechanics are simple enough you could easily transport it into any system of choice, and the ideas for the creatures in this book are really good. They're not generic. Some of them are close to things that you know from other D&D books and things, but these are all really interesting, unique creatures. So you should definitely steal them and put them into your games. They're divided by climates. There's frigid climate creatures, temperate climate creatures, and torrid climate creatures. And then the different regions you might find them in those different areas within those climates. So a lowland, a woodland, a highland, or an underland, wetlands, deserts, all that. Okay, so here you go. Here's how the book is introduced, how the naming conventions and how things are organized, and the treasure you can get. Here we get the creatures. The incessant, the white cat of 100 paws, the final crane, the mouth that goes on legs, the fell burr, the tusker, the rime drake, the angel of ice, the flurry worm, the snow creeper, the ravenborn, the shale sentinel, the owl bat, the frost biter. I mean, these names are so good, and they draw you right in, along with a little piece of art for every creature, just to give you a sense of what it is, and its stats. You get the damage that it might do. This one, the lure light, which you probably have seen elsewhere as, like a will-o'-the-wisp or something like that. It's kind of like that. It's very similar to that. You have them, they appear in hordes, they're small, they're organized, and they're undead. They damage by draining your life, they ignore your armor. They have 3 hit points and 0 armor, so they're easy to kill each, but they are lots, and there's floating and intangible. Makes it a little harder because they're intangible. Darkness fills the deeps like water fills a well, and many a soul has drowned therein. Some lost spirits, variously appearing as a flickering torch, that's a mistake there, right? As flickering torches, lanterns, the gleam of jewels in the dark, drift through tunnel and cave, luring others to a fatal or crippling misstep into an unseen pit or chasm. Victims so injured are swarmed by other lure lights seeking to increase their company. A lure light is freed from its eternal wandering when the physical remains of the body to which it was once attached are returned to the surface. Instinct to lure the greedy and the lost. Embody a tempting shine or glimmer. Draw other lure lights to the scene. Swarm the injured like a frenzy of fireflies. And the treasure is property of victims. Great creature. And there's not only is there like a cool idea here, so it's basically a will-o'-the-wisp that doesn't just go over bogs, but it goes into dungeons and dark places in the world. But there's a way to beat it without killing it. Or maybe there's a way, because assuming you destroy it somehow, deal 3 damage to it, it seems like it'll come back because it's only freed when its physical remains are returned to the surface. That's a really cool idea. So there could be this area that's full of these lure lights, that prevents passage through these caves because there's so many of them. Your mission could be to clear out the bodies, clear out the old remains, the bones, and maybe there's a creature down there who's munching on the bones, so you have to kill it and bring it up. You know, who knows what the quest hook could be, but that creature in itself is a great quest hook. There is the house hopper, the praying sparrow, the stinging billy, the channeled ooze, the jewel bird, Fenkin, great armored swamp stoats, the death nose, which are, we've seen these, you know, these are the sting bats or the sturges, blighters, shiny silence, bone pickers, hulking brutes, all watchers, the blighted whites, flying rock wolf, the maw crack, it's like a giant cave mimic, the deep ranger, the dream eater, the architect lichen, the fallen giant, the waste walker, the eternal rest, the sand snapper, the undying allotherge. Allotherge? Yeah. The gemback. Let's read this one. Solitary, small, and magical. Damage, snapping beak, D8 hand. Hit points 10, armor 3. Special qualities, aquatic. Retracting head and limbs into its beautiful crystalline carapace is the first line of defense, but persistent predators will be rewarded by a sudden flash of arcane energy, powerful enough to blind and stun a giant. They say the shell, amethyst, aquamarine, topaz acts as a magical battery, absorbing the sun's energy all day. Such concentration demands release, which may explain the flashes of colored light seen at night in the wetlands at the desert's edge. Note to collectors, hunt only in the pre-dawn. Instinct, to amble on to the next meal of sweet grass. To distract them, distract them from more important matters. Blind and stun them with a sudden burst of light. Be gone when their vision clears. And their treasure is the crystalline shell. So they're like snapping turtles with giant jeweled shells. That's a great idea. Super cool little creature you could throw into your world as something. And it's obviously a treasure in and of itself to hunt. But there's a process by which you hunt it. It's not just as simple as you go out and fight it. No, only hunt them in the pre-dawn because they absorb the sun's light, become very powerful. And they've got to expend that at night. There's the sleeved leech, the river runner, the rat dragon, flayed beast, the devil monkey, the black sap of discord, the green mother, the skull-headed pester, the hill cat, the water grazer, the king of the mountain, deep lily, the awakened sentry, the stone slipper, the demon pudding. And then you have an index of all the creatures which paste there on the climate terrain and the artist that did it. Awesome little bestiary. Totally worth it for inspiration. These creatures are awesome. And again, you don't need to know all of the stats for them. The stats are simple enough that you could transfer them into any game. But the ideas there and the hooks that are built into the descriptions are totally worth it. I'm going to take this entire book basically and throw it into one of my worlds. All of these 56 monsters are going into my games because I like them all. I think they're super cool. So anyway, A Book of Beasts by Jason Lutes, the Perilous Deeps, the Perilous Almanacs, and the Perilous Wilds. All highly recommend, regardless of your system. If you use Dungeon World, I mean, you basically have to have these. If you don't play Dungeon World, you should still get them because they are really great resources for any GM in any game. All right, well, I hope this has been interesting, and I'll see you guys in another video.